Hey everyone, Charlie here. We're running a quick survey. We want to better understand who our listeners are. Do me a huge favor and fill out that survey. It takes under a minute, and the link is in the show description. This helps us make better content for you. Thanks a ton for listening. Link in the show notes.
Today we have on Christopher Goes from actually a lot of different things. A very early contributor to Ethereum, has since worked on Anoma, Namada, and the entire Cosmos ecosystem. Like very, sort of OG developer, I would say, in the smart contract space. Definitely somebody that is often looked to for insights. And so today we're going to talk about all of this stuff: Ethereum, Cosmos, intents, public goods, you name it. But yeah, maybe just a little bit of background, and then we can go from there.
For sure. Thank you for having me. Well, try to condense this. I first learned about crypto when I was a bored kid in Oregon, which, among other things, has cheap hydropower electricity. And I was into building computers. I think Bitcoin was about $1 back then, and it was still possible to mine it with GPUs. So I built, used my pocket money allowance from a year or something, $1,000, built a computer with some GPUs, mined some Bitcoins, participated on the Bitcoin Talk forums back in 2011, which was, just whole different days of unregistered securities. I mean,
sure.
There's a great structural resonance through the years. There was this platform called GLBSE. I should stop at this point in my explanation of what happened back then, but there was this platform called GLBSE, which sold mining futures contracts, Bitcoin mining futures contracts back in 2011. It's sophisticated stuff. Shut down eventually. It wasn't even making a pretense of being like decentralized finance, right? It was just finance with Bitcoin, run by some guy who went under the name Nefario on the forums. So if you trusted your money to some guy with the name Nefario, anyway, that was that. And mostly I didn't do too much serious until around 2017, 2018, when I got back into Ethereum. I worked on a DEX protocol called Wyvern at the time, which some people might have heard of. At one point, it was used as the backend of OpenSea.
Okay.
There was a very proto DAO associated with that. It never really went anywhere. Some interesting history. And then, more seriously, I joined the Cosmos project specifically to work on IBC, the Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol, which I kind of did the design and there was, Cosmos was a really just a land of like anarchist organizational drama, and it's selected for people who like that, which has pros and cons. So I, also dealt with some of the organizational interoperability questions in addition to the technical ones. I left Cosmos after IBC was shipped. That was kind of like my thing that I wanted to do there, and started Anoma and Namada. My co-founders, Alba and Adrian, lots of other people over the years. Maybe it's like, I haven't described the project this way, but sometimes Anoma sometimes has aspects of it's kind of like Cosmos 2. Like it was me trying to fix all the problems that I saw, in that ecosystem and protocol at the time, and synthesize it with, I would say, it's almost kind of a synthesis of like Cosmos, Ethereum, and Zcash, like programmability from Ethereum, sort of political polycentrism, interoperability from Cosmos, privacy, sort of really a solid focus on, just giving the user autonomy and control from Zcash, right? We try to take all those things, synthesize them with the actual distributed systems literature. And when you read it, it turns out the thing that most of crypto is really trying to design is like a distributed operating system, much more so than, a blockchain is a data structure, right? Calling the thing that we're working on a blockchain is kind of like calling a car rubber. It's just misleading. So anyway, Anoma tries to synthesize all of these aspects, first-class intents, first-class information flow control, kind of the counterpoint to privacy, choosing what to reveal, which is really what you do in a distributed system, first-class heterogeneous trust, so many different chains, many different parties, users and applications have sort of direct, reified control over this instead of it being implicit. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, okay, that was a lot. So we'll come back to a lot of those points. Like we'll come back to Anoma, Namada, IBC, and stuff. But let's start with going back to kind of your initial work in Ethereum. And I'm going to lay this question up, and you can take this any direction, and hopefully the spicier the better. But what was your vision for Ethereum because it's a bit of a leading question, right? We talked about this before the podcast, but I'm going to sort of lead this. But what was your initial vision for Ethereum? That was like the compelling, selling point, if you will. Like, what did you want to see from, what you started working on?
I mean, the honest answer is that at the time I worked on Ethereum, I don't know if I had a vision for Ethereum. I mean, Ethereum was originally pitched in the Bitcoin Talk thread as like Bitcoin, but with more complex financial contracts, which was never really a product that interested me personally, at least not at the time. But I thought, I mean, they'd done, just compared to the world in 2014 or whatever it was, they had done really impressive technical work, making the thing actually programmable. Like no one else had done that. Colored coins were kind of a joke.
Yeah.
All of the, no one else was serious about the project. And I thought that was cool. I played around with Solidity. I tried to write, Wyvern, the protocol I worked on at the time, it was an attempt to be a generalized DEX. Like instead of just trading tokens or whatever it was, you could have the people who were trading specify functions themselves, right? Like you can make the control over, what state transition happens on the network itself programmatic. And I figure like, you already have this distributed system. You don't need to build all these little DEX protocols for like very specific things when you can just have the people who are, specifying their preferences, specify what state transition they want the system to execute, right? Examples, and people could sell whole smart contracts. They could do kind of complex bartering deals. That was the idea. Not really. I was more into like the theory and design, and I wrote the code, but I wasn't interested in doing the whole product. And at the time, I was also pretty, I thought that there would be sort of a more polycentric ecosystem of many things, not just one thing. And Ethereum was very like, interoperability historically has not been, I think, considered an important problem by Ethereum. And I thought that it was. So I wanted to work on, I was kind of more motivated to work on Cosmos for that reason.
Okay, but when you say
that's where I went.
When you say DEX, like what was the design of this DEX? Like I assume it was pre-AMM, or was it similar to an AMM? If you could trade like full smart contracts, I'm thinking, I don't know, like order book plus AMM plus like really slow Ether Delta type order book thing. Like what was the structure at the time, or at least what you were working
That's
on?
right. That's right. It supported both on-chain and off-chain orders, as in you could craft an order by signing a message or by sending a transaction on-chain, so you could use it for both. It was around the time of the first AMMs. AMMs were not really popular like when I sort of deployed the contracts, but I think the concept might have been there. I'm not exactly sure on the timelines, but it was around the time. And users would specify, it's kind of like it used the word intent. It was like an early intent system. Users would specify their intents, like literally in terms of functions. So in terms of calls to different smart contracts and like checks against the EVM bytecode that got executed. Now, the most straightforward way to do this would be to literally call eval. This is not possible because the EVM doesn't support eval for reasons that I've never understood. But you can kind of approximate it using like deploy. The thing you have to do is basically deploy a new contract and then call the contract, right? You can't just eval code, but you can get the same function.
So this led you into Cosmos because you felt that this was a better solution to sovereignty and interop. Is that directionally correct? What was the transition from working on this DEX type thing on Ethereum into, oh wow, this Cosmos thing is quite fascinating. Like this is where I want to go.
Yeah, it was some interest in, at the time I was interested in like political polycentrism, theories of the commons, sort of, I don't know, different communities running their own blockchains, this kind of idea about how things might turn out. Blockchains are databases, and to me, this kind of thing, like local sovereignty, just sort of devolved or federated political systems, are how politics of important state like money and bank records and property records and stuff like that actually works in real world social systems. And I thought, probably, not really a reason to expect this to change just because the database technology part of things changed. And actually, these kinds of open protocols create really cool opportunities for interoperability between, sort of systems that, at least in their legal forms, are not necessarily so easy to interoperate, right? But that was the motivation for me to work on Cosmos. Just like, I mean, at the time, no one really had like concrete visions. It was just Ethereum was all about smart contracts, and Cosmos was all about like Internet of
Yeah.
blockchains. Like, we'll connect all the blockchains, and there'll be local blockchains. That sounded interesting, and I got a job, so I just went and worked on it. It wasn't.
Yeah. So what were you working on at Cosmos initially?
Mostly IBC. So IBC is the inter-blockchain communication protocol that Cosmos designed, developed, and launched, that connects, all the Cosmos chains today and some other chains. And I think there's an implementation for Ethereum now, and probably some rollups.
Okay, and so then, just start rambling. What has been your experience now with Cosmos? Like, what's gone well? What has been harder to contend with? Like, just give us your overarching view, and maybe I'll probe after.
Yeah, I mean, I have fond memories of working on Cosmos. I met lots of lovely people who were still great friends. I think the project selected for, and at least, or maybe just a combination of selection and contingent historical circumstance, but the organizational structure was never very functional, to put it mildly. If you want more, exposition, you can find plenty on the internet. But that. I think that the combination of that and Cosmos, although it suffered from the game being too easy, honestly. Like, the Cosmos Hub was launched, Atom did nothing. It still does nothing.
Yeah.
It generated no revenue. It still generates no revenue. It didn't have a product. It still doesn't have a product. None of these things have changed, right? But there was just like enough treasury to keep that going. And lots of people have built cool open source things. I think with a much more focused and sort of well-run organization, actually it could have worked. Like, just build the sort of public goods thing. But I think that, execution hasn't necessarily been there. I mean, part of the organizational drama I was involved in was, there was a sort of, one of the founders of the project, Jay, at one point declared himself the second coming of Jesus, and went on his whole journey. I'm there for that journey, but it wasn't quite the fusion that you would want with the CEO role of a project, let's just say. So he eventually left, and then but at the time there was a lot of chaos. The engineering team, which I was involved in, in some sense, like, informally unionized and quit the company, but kept working for the foundation. It was the kind of thing that like could only happen in those years. So lots of drama there. Yeah, Cosmos also never really had proper research function. And some of these problems are just really hard. Like, interoperability is a really hard problem. Cosmos never took privacy seriously. Building, just figuring out how to even synthesize with social science research if you're trying to incorporate real world notions of political systems into even just what guides your design. I think that requires.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you say that there wasn't the level of research needed, because that may be true, like at a practical level. Ironically, though, one thing, so there's basically two things you hear about Cosmos from a bird's eye view. One is an insane amount of drama, people fighting all the time, which you just said. The other, though, on a more positive note, is this sort of catchphrase, which is Cosmos had it right all along, right? And I think what people love to regurgitate this, and I think generally what they're saying is the app chain vision was correct in the way that these app chains interoperate natively. You may have disagreements as to whether or not it's functionally natively, but the premise of there being this Cosmos hub, and then the designing for specific use cases, designing for specific purposes, was correct all along. So that's kind of interesting. You say the research wasn't really there. What kind of, like, how do you view now, like, was Cosmos correct, I guess, with this app chain thesis? I mean, I would lean towards yes, but it's still like very much a debate, right?
Yeah, I would say partially. I think Cosmos was right that, different projects and communities will want to run and control their own infrastructure in some sense, certainly, have their own tokens that are kind of associated with regulating it, and customize things. I think Cosmos went too far in the direction of everyone wants to build their own state machine with no like shared virtual machine. I think people do want a shared virtual machine. People want to like customize their applications and control their sequencing rules and do stuff like this. They want control over the configuration. But I think in some sense, Cosmos standardized too little. And this makes it it just takes a long time to build stuff. Because you have all these different state machines and they interoperate only at the message passing level with IBC,
right,
but not at the like programmability level.
Yeah. So, okay, then like let's go a little bit into your work with Anoma and Namada. And I'll be honest, I get them a little bit confused because they kind of sound a little bit similar. Namada is the privacy aspect, right? And Anoma is your personal vision of Cosmos 2.0, the way it should have been. Is that so? You can sort of explain
that description is facetious.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. I should. That's not fair to. Anoma is. I guess it's just our attempt to like synthesize many ideas into one coherent distributed operating system, which is the basic concept that we understand it as. So that draws on like kind of accidentally, but in retrospect, I realized it draws on the Ethereum world computer vision. It draws on the Cosmos, political polycentrism vision. It draws on like the Zcash privacy vision, and tries to knit all of those things together into a whole protocol that makes sense.
Okay, so wait.
Namada is more like a specific application, just like shielded payments.
So Anoma is a Cosmos app chain. Is that correct?
No, Anoma is a protocol designed from scratch.
Okay.
It draws inspiration from, conceptually it draws inspiration from, but it does not reuse any code from Ethereum, Cosmos, or Zcash.
Okay, so what is the unlock with Anoma? Like give me the elevator pitch for Anoma specifically, like, and what you were trying to do, drawing from these other protocols you worked on.
Relative to, I would say Anoma brings to applications sort of two key architectural features that you kind of get for free. The first is information flow control. So like being able to regulate how information gets disclosed to different parties through the course of the execution of Anoma works with like intents and high level, declarative specifications of what users want to happen, and being able to regulate how information flows through the system as those are executed, right? So you could think of information flow control as like the declarative counterpart to, zero knowledge proofs or something like this. Like it's a policy or a way to specify what you want to be disclosed to whom, and then different cryptographic techniques can be used to implement it. Mostly the cryptographic techniques are there, and we just try to kind of hook them into a system that's programmable and easy to deal with from the developer and user perspective.
Okay.
And the second...
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask you to not define, but maybe explain intents in a broader sense than maybe a lot of people understand them, right? So like the joke on Twitter is that they're limit orders, right? But really, that is certainly not what I think your vision of intents is, right? Like, and if I'm paraphrasing here, and tell me if I kind of understand this correctly, like an intent is just a specific preference that a user or an application wants to be able to define, right? And so like in the context of trading, this may be a limit order, but it's much broader than that. So like converge these ideas of how us degens who are just eating coins and think that, oh, okay, this is like a slightly better way to not get sandwiched versus everything you kind of envision for them.
Right. You're not wrong. Like intents is a word, and there could be many different concepts. And, we published a concept of intents, a concept with that name in a math paper. And then for whatever reason, I don't know how much it has to do with us. Later, it got popular and people started using it to describe things that really basically are cross-chain limit orders.
Yeah.
So,
like bridging very much,
many different
right?
intents floating around. Right. Nothing wrong with that. The mathematical definition we used is quite declarative and does even cover cross-chain limit orders. So these definitions aren't contradictory, although it doesn't much help. But for us, intents consist always of two things: constraints and preferences. So it's a more declarative or higher level way to specify what you as the user want and authorize to happen when you're using a distributed system. And when you send a transaction to a specific blockchain, such as just sending a transaction to Ethereum, in general, what you're specifying is a specific imperative execution trace, right? In the EVM, you start somewhere, you issue a message call to a contract, that contract runs some code, that code determines which state changes happen, it might call other contracts, etc. The thing that you authorize when you interact with the system is the execution. With an intent, instead, you authorize kind of what end states you're okay with. Like I'm okay with any transaction or even multiple transactions in some cases that change my assets in such and such a way, as long as I get at least 5 USDC at the end and lose only 1 ETH or whatever it is. And preferences that all else remaining the same, I would like more ETH if possible. And if you package those together into kind of a nice mathematical abstraction and data structure, you can use the constraints to constrain what the system does. So to only allow state transitions that meet the constraints that the user has specified. And you can use the preferences to create a feedback function. So if I'm sending intents off to all these solvers and blockchains and stuff, but the thing that I really care about is at the end I get a good price for my asset, let's say with a swap, or that, I don't know, some fairness criterion was met, or even that like something gets donated, like that could also be my preference, then I've provided this information to the parties in the system so they know what my preference is, and I can measure over time who is satisfying it the most. Like if I consider sending my intent to 10 solvers and like solver A always gives me a better price than solver B, then I'll just send more intents to solver A in the future, right? So you want this kind of feedback function.
A lot of this is like very theoretical. Like I can tell you're very much in the protocol design aspect. Like give me can you explain, practically speaking, why an intent-centric design space is preferable to maybe just Ethereum as is or something like that? Like what is the unlock there? And maybe if you can put it into terms that, trader or degen or application user would understand more intuitively.
I see. Yeah, for sure. So let's take I'll try the market structure perspective. So from the market structure perspective, intents are very helpful because they allow market participants to specify what their preferences are at the right level of granularity. Most users, when they use these systems, and they send transactions, they're actually being more specific than they want to, right? They're like, you have to pick an AMM to send a transaction to, or you have to pick a blockchain to send a transaction to, or and you have to pick, all of these parameters that are kind of arcane. And what you care about is usually, I want, even if you're just executing a swap, right? I want at least 5 ETH. And I want it on Ethereum or Base or Arbitrum, let's say, and I want the best price. And the rest of the details, I don't care, figure it out, as long as, the market equilibrium doesn't screw me too much, right? That's where the preference comes in a little bit. So if you think about the whole network, the distributed network, if you have users specifying their preferences at the level of granularity at which they actually have them, then this gives more degrees of freedom, to inside the network, to operators and other parties to optimize the actual market structure, like to deduplicate different AMMs that do kind of the same thing, to route assets where they need to be routed, etc.
What is the most used intent-based model currently? Like, is it bridging? Is it I don't know? Is CowSwap an intents protocol? Or what is the most used implementation of this currently?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider limit orders and sort of batch swap orders and cross-chain, similar cross-chain things to be specific types of intents. And I think within crypto, those are certainly the most used.
Okay.
Within there are some, like in TradFi, there's some sort of combinatorial structured financial product things that look like intents.
Okay.
You get some more complex stuff there.
Okay. The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs, who I've been following for 3 years now. They're one of the strongest teams I know in crypto. Ellipsis Labs is a small engineering team with a flat structure. They build complex systems, primarily in Rust. For engineers who like challenges, here's the kind of problem they solve. A layer 2 blockchain needs to maintain 100 million accounts and generate a state root after each transaction batch. The root must be built within 50 milliseconds. How would you design a system to ensure the root construction is fast enough? High-performance challenges are core to Ellipsis Labs' mission as they build modern crypto finance. They believe finance needs more than an upgrade. It needs a complete rewrite. The success of their first product, Phoenix V1, speaks for itself, doing over $70 billion in organic trading volume. Now, Ellipsis Labs is building Atlas, the blockchain purpose-built for verifiable finance. I know this team personally, and I like them because they're unique in the crypto space. They have a long-term focus, they work in person from their New York City headquarters, and they're here to build products that fundamentally change the world of finance. If you want to learn more about their open rules, go to ellipsislabs.xyz/careers. All right, so now tie this into Namada, which is built atop Anoma, which is not a Cosmos app chain.
No, sorry. No, we just launched 2 projects,
Okay.
like a sort of a similar group of people launched 2 projects. They actually don't share a technical stack.
Okay.
We wanted to build a product specifically for shielded payments. That's Namada. Namada is a Cosmos app chain. At least it uses Tendermint. It does not use the Cosmos SDK.
Okay.
Yeah, the reason we did that is we wanted to like build and launch that more quickly.
Okay.
And we knew that Anoma.
All right. So talking about Namada, shielded transactions, what does this mean in practice, and like what are you aiming for here?
Yes, Namada is just multi-asset shielded payments. Payments are like the boring use case, but somehow the one that no one has really solved yet. Exactly. I mean, there are stablecoin companies that are now trying, I guess, but Namada it takes some technology from Zcash, the original circuits from Sapling, and upgrades them to support multiple assets. Of course, most people just want privacy for assets that they already have, like USDC or ETH or Bitcoin or something. They don't want to use an asset which is tied to privacy, like SEC. And Namada provides that as a service. So you can send your assets over IBC or from Ethereum through IBC Eureka, and you can make shielded payments on Namada.
Okay, so I'll be honest, privacy is not my area of expertise. What is the optimal design? I would assume that you think Namada's aiming for that, but what in your opinion is kind of like the optimal design of, let's say, privacy-focused payments, right? I think there's like, I hear about a lot of different things, and I hear about Monero, I hear about Zcash, and then it sounds like this is, sort of an attempt to say, look, like people don't necessarily want exposure to something like Monero if they just want to pay in a private way. And so like, what is your kind of like ideal vision, and then maybe the end game of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the product of technically how to do privacy preserving payments and also allow users to disclose whatever they want to disclose to whomever they want to disclose it to, pretty easily. That problem actually was solved by Zcash a long time ago. Now they just didn't make it multi-assets, and maybe some of the UX parts weren't there. But you can get really quite excellent properties using zero knowledge proofs, as Zcash does, and sort of commitment nullifier constructions. When you send a shielded payment using Namada, you don't reveal anything except you reveal to the recipient that you paid them X, whatever token, right? And then you can separately choose to reveal, any properties of that payment you would want to different parties, to other, if you need to reveal it for regulatory reasons, you can do that. Reveal, only to the person in question. If you need to prove like where your funds came from, you can do that. All of the history is tracked. It's just all like encrypted to different parties, and they can choose when to reveal which parts. So I think that is relatively, Monero uses versions of ring signatures, which they've upgraded over the years. I don't know all of the detail, but it's just less. The anonymity set is much smaller, and it's quite vulnerable to an adversary basically using decoys. So like creating a bunch of transactions to try and make, even if your anonymity set is 20, if your adversary can make 19 transactions, then they can, of course, identify you. So
that's one thing I was going to ask about. And again, this is because I have a, sparse understanding of really the privacy space, and I really shouldn't be commenting on it because it's much more technical than I'm, knowledgeable about. But I often, my understanding is a lot of times it does come down to sort of like the anonymity set, right? And like does that apply in Namada as well? Or are there unlocks in the sense that, with a lot of these things, like what you just said, if there's 19 people, that is one person, and then there's one person who's trying to remain private, well, if they know that, they are 19 of those, they can deduce, or in other scenarios, like chain analysis can come to converge very closely on understanding who the likely, outliers are or whatever. What is like is this something that largely relies on like the anonymity set and like that being the privacy unlock?
Right. So with the Zcash style construction as used by Namada, so with Namada, your anonymity set is the entire history of shielded transactions on the chain. So an adversary would have to have, in order to identify you, in general, would have to have like issued all of them, which means as long as there are some other real users, in practice, your anonymity set is like the other real users, right? So you still need some other people to be using the system to have any anonymity, but there's no, the size of the anonymity set grows as long as you use the system. I mean, there's some minutia with like different assets, of course, or like different assets when they move in and out. When you make a shielded transaction, no one knows which asset it is, but when you withdraw from the shielded pool, someone can say, oh, you withdrew BTC, and like, there's only been one deposit of 50 BTC and you just withdrew 50 BTC. Maybe that's,
got it.
It's suspicious. But it's, you really can't do better as long as part of the system is public.
Yeah. All right. Like, let me ask you, just zooming out, how do you feel about the direction of privacy and payments and crypto in general? Like there's, this is one of those constant, I guess, battles, I would say, where there's this sort of stated preference versus revealed preference, where we all agree, well, I think a lot of people agree that, there needs to be better privacy solutions. And yet, unfortunately, a lot of what we see is that people don't use privacy solutions to the degree that we'd like, or, and there's this other kind of catchphrase, which is like, well, you don't need privacy until you do. And it's like, well, I can sit here and agree with that, but also say that if 99% of users aren't using it currently, like that doesn't help us. So just from a high level, what are your thoughts on the direction of this space when it comes to, us putting every financial transaction on a transparent ledger? Like, there's certainly drawbacks to that if we're not also designing for, some real privacy.
For sure. I mean, I do not recommend using transparent blockchains, and I personally don't do it.
Okay.
If you look outside at the world that we're in, do you want what you did to be visible to all of the various people using all of the various AI surveillance technologies and Palantir and whoever for the rest of time to selectively persecute you? I mean, your life, not mine, but not you specifically. I think it's dumb. I think it's crazy. Like, also, no business that, serious users like know this. Businesses won't use blockchains, or at least not without like some extra assurance, and I don't know, Stripe or something mediating it for payments. It doesn't fly. I mean, I have even in places with lax privacy laws, in practice, you still have much better privacy just when you send bank transactions than you do on public blockchains. So I think that's it's practically untenable. I think there is at least like strategic recognition of this. I agree that there hasn't been a lot of wide scale adoption, but you can complain about people, or you could try to build better products. And one of these strategies has results.
Exactly. And I certainly agree with the last point, but what does force people into thinking about this more? Because again, this was one of the core, first principles thinking originally with blockchains. And you go back to Satoshi, and he immediately established that, this is not tenable for privacy in the long run. Like, there's a very specific reason we're putting this on a transparent ledger, but ideally this is not how people transact in 20, 50 years or whatever. Like, what is the chasm we cross where everyone's like, oh, this was a terrible idea, we got to shift paths? Like, it's hard to see with what you were saying, Palantir, Chainalysis, governments around the world, bad actors being able to identify how much money you have in your wallet at any time. Like, what changes this? You hear a lot, and then in practice, again, we're sort of left just observing the revealed preferences.
For sure. I mean, historically, I think a good or a case that I like to analyze is Signal. I think Signal is a very good example of an application that A, has really strong privacy guarantees, and B, has like provided a sufficiently good UX and been sufficiently well managed to find a sizable amount of PMF, especially given like sort of cypherpunk background and nature of the project. And if you look at Signal's adoption graphs, many of which are actually public on the internet, like easy to study, it's really nonlinear. As in, they're slow for years. Then there's like some protests.
Yeah, step function.
And it's like, it goes like this. Yeah. There's like a step function.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's kind of a sad answer. Like, when are people going to adopt privacy technology? When some horrible persecution happens. But I think that's partially just true. Yeah. But you need to have the products ready. Right. Like, if the products aren't ready, it doesn't work, right? Signal was there. Yeah. It was like you could download it as an app on the Google Play Store. You didn't need to onboard your fiat. It was just messaging. You needed to send a link to your friends. Pretty easy, honestly, on the scale of things.
Yeah.
So I think crypto hasn't really quite had that event yet. I mean, there's certain kinds of payments or classes of payments that are, persecuted or blocked by various actors, and so maybe some people have, if you're doing, things that are not illegal but like pressured by the government in some jurisdiction. Some kinds of sex work, for example, that might be a reason that you would want to use one of these systems. I think there is still a core group of early adopters who will do it anyway. In crypto, the closest thing right now is like some people don't want their trades to be linkable to their account because they get, this is really not my area. Like, as you could tell, I live in protocol design world, but I think it has to do with like trading meme coins on Solana. And then if they see that the dev account is selling or whatever, then people will panic. So, I mean, for better or for worse, that might be an adoption vector for privacy.
Yeah, I think definitely. And then
I've been looking at a little. Like,
yeah, I definitely agree with that. And then even, you kind of mentioned this before, but there's large institutional actors, and if they want to trade, I mean, assuming adoption continues, if they want to trade on chain on order books or dexes, like, there's some argument that there's a recent argument, that if they kind of reveal their preferences, they may actually get better execution. And then there's scenarios where it's sort of the opposite, and you really don't want, Wintermute does not want you to see every transaction that they are making, right, for execution reasons. So that is, I think that's definitely a valid point there.
For sure. Also, I mean, and I think sometimes, I don't know, maybe revealing preferences being good is used as an argument for transparent only technology. Yeah. This just doesn't make sense. Like if you have privacy preserving payments or other things, you can always choose to reveal information. Yeah. That choice is always within your control, right?
Yeah, this is another thing.
You're just not forced to.
Yeah, this is another thing that's kind of interesting that I don't know, I wouldn't say struggled with, but I found kind of, paradoxical in a sense is, and this has less to do with trading, but more just from, you see a lot of lawyers and advocates for crypto who oftentimes these are representing large businesses and applications that make a lot of money. And they often push the selling point as, this is so much better because it's all transparent. And they're going in front of regulators and saying, no, look, you can track everything. And I think, maybe you and I are looking at this and we're like, yeah, so that's one way that you could increase adoption, but also that, I don't know, is such a great way to phrase this. Like, here, we have designed the surveillance state for you. Go ahead and grab it by the horns, And it's like, I don't know if that's exactly the angle I would take always, right?
For sure. I mean, I also think if you are a government looking at this problem a little bit more rationally and not just taking bribes, then you don't want a transparent only system. It is horrible for at least any kind of like, I mean, democracies and the CCP should not want this alike because it opens your entire communications graph to foreign adversaries. So like, no rational state will ever, I mean, they'll laugh you out of the room unless they're just taking bribes. So,
okay, let's pivot a little bit. We touched on this at the beginning, but I said we were going to talk more about this. The context was that I heard you hop on, I think you were just in the room or something, in a podcast with the Expansion podcast. And the background for the conversation was Ethereum was initially pitched. I'm being very reductive here. Ethereum was initially pitched as this world computer. And then you kind of hopped into the conversation and said, well, this was my vision of the world computer. This is what it's now. And maybe there are some, things we've learned along the way as to what this world computer means. So you can start wherever, but yeah, talk me through your kind of thought process and maybe your evolution.
Right. I mean, yeah, I came at this, for years, I thought world computer was a marketing slogan and no more, and I dismissed it. And if you look at the history of it, it kind of was a marketing slogan. Like, the original Bitcoin Talk post talked about decentralized financial contracts. At least Vitalik credits the term world computer to, I believe, Vinay Gupta, who used to do marketing at the Ethereum Foundation years and years and years ago. But it was a world computer. Like the launch video was entitled "Ethereum, the World Computer," right? So they really focused on it at that time.
Yeah.
And it was pitched as kind of like some in some sense singular world computer where you can do all the stuff, where you can send payments, where you can do IoT, like a giant distributed spreadsheet in the cloud, like the one database backend to rule them all. And that had a lot of, I think it was not, it was good marketing for a reason. Like it's a thing that makes sense.
Yeah.
Why do we have all these separate databases that speak, random different languages and don't interoperate with each other? Why, we use banks or ride sharing apps or food delivery, whatever it is, these all basically do the same thing. Like they have different front ends and different legal setups, but mostly they do the same thing from a functionality perspective. Why can't we just run this all on one shared interoperable system? I mean, I think that vision is quite solid. Ethereum did not ship a world computer, and I think one kind of the sleight of hand that happens now is that the term world computer is used, but then people take it to mean the blockchain. And a blockchain is not a world computer for many reasons. For one, a blockchain is just like one place where things get ordered. And in a world computer, you don't want to order everything in one place. This is the dumbest distributed systems design decision you could possibly make, because the one irreducible cost in everything is communications, latency, and handling more messages at one point because of physics. Like you have to send more stuff to one point. You can make the CPUs faster, but there's always going to be a bottleneck at the physical layer. But also because a lot of stuff, there's like a lot of the kinds of interactions that people are doing in, with these distributed systems involve what we sometimes call counterparty discovery in the context of intent. So like you are the rider, you want a car, you need to discover a counterparty. You are the trader, you want someone to sell to, you need to discover a counterparty. Totally ordered transaction logs are horrible systems for doing counterparty discovery because they're totally ordered. And counterparty discovery doesn't need to be totally ordered. It's just like a sort of distributed peer-to-peer network thing, right? Like you want to send your intent around until you find a car or whatever. Or maybe you run some auctions in different places. Different solvers can do different things. But I think that's also an important part of what makes a world computer work from the user perspective.
Okay, so then what was the failure, specifically the world computer part? Like if you had to kind of if you had to point to specific, this is clearly not the world computer vision, like what comes to mind for you where you say, yeah, like this is what I thought and this is what ended up happening. This is why I no longer believe that terminology specifically.
Right. I mean, I do want to give credit where credit is due. This is like, this is not my vision. Like, I think this was Ethereum's vision, and it was better understood in 2014, I feel like, or better, like, because there was, for example, there was the Mist browser back then. Like, it was kind of an attempt to build a front end for this sort of whole ecosystem of apps. There was the Swarm. It was like a peer-to-peer network storage system called Swarm.
Okay.
There was this old graphic of like users with different sort of local interfaces to Ethereum, and then like the blockchain was in the middle. But there were also all these other parts. Like, at least in 2014, Ethereum did not equate world computer with blockchain. But now, now that sleight of hand, at least that kind of happens on Twitter. But also, in some way, Ethereum does have more of the back end, right? Like there are like lots of rollups and off-chain services and all of this stuff. But what has been lost is the logical unity. You can't program the whole thing like it's one system. You have to deal with all of this heterogeneity, and the heterogeneity just kills you, especially when I don't know, interoperability has just not been considered a very hard problem. And very little effort has been, because interoperability is hard both technically and socially. Technically, it's hard to define, the very minimal interfaces you need to communicate between different parts of a system. And socially, an interoperability protocol, like the more abstract your interoperability protocol is, the more stronger your network effects are, right? And now, now the Ethereum ecosystem is very competitive, and everyone's building their little interoperability protocols, which include like them as the middleman, right? But we probably don't want that. We want a neutral interoperability protocol, but there's no, it's hard to get people to adopt this without some coordination, right? So,
like, how does this make you? And this sounds like a cringe question, but like, how does this make you feel personally? Like, do you feel like there was a real deviation from the vision that was that was like people truly went against the original vision, or was this just kind of how it played out with the incentives? I mean, that's like a reductive way to say it, like, was there like was there a cabal? I'm being extreme here, but was there a cabal that decided like, okay, we're going to actually do it this way? Or was it just sort of how these things played out? Like, I lean toward the latter, but I don't know your opinion, like in terms of where that discrepancy became like obvious in your mind. Like, what was that?
Yeah, I think I also lean towards the latter. I mean, I guess where I would I feel like there's really a lack of coherence in, communications and usage of technical terms and kind of just like strategy. And it's hard to keep a decentralized network coherent. It's doubly hard when you try to govern it on Twitter or whatever. But like people will say the world computer, but it doesn't really match up with the actual abstractions or technical things that people are building. I wouldn't quite call that an incentive problem. It's related, but I would also just call it like a media design problem. Like if Ethereum is this distributed, sort of decentralized governance system, how is that happening? And is the way in which communications are flowing that result in governance decisions being made and people saying stuff and describing Ethereum and like everything that is Ethereum, right? Is that way conducive to coherence or not? And Twitter is just like an anti-coherence function, par excellence, right? And especially with, I think to their credit, the Ethereum Foundation has followed this philosophy of governance minimalism for years, which I deeply respect. But also, there's this kind of vacuum. Like coherence does not magically emerge. People who've worked in complex organizations are very familiar with this. It must be consciously crafted and kind of worked towards. And if you have media which select against it, and this problem is not unique to Ethereum, like a lot of the world has media coherence problems right now, right? But if you have media that select against it, it's and you lose it, it's nearly impossible to get back.
Okay, let me ask you like a little bit more specific question, and I'm going to lead this with something that you can tell me if I'm correct in thinking this is true. Yeah, you went to work on Cosmos, so I think you were pretty early-ish to the notion of app chains and sort of hub and spoke model, if you will. And Ethereum has since adopted this. So I would guess that you think, I say adopted this, I mean, our general purpose L2 is the same as app, chains with very specific, I mean, we can debate that, but directionally they are the same way, right? So I think you probably think that is the correct direction, at least from that angle. What I want to ask though is, specifically, do you agree with that or no? First, you can answer that first.
Correct direction for what?
For scaling, maybe, or the notion of this L2-centric roadmap versus an extreme, singular vision to scale the L1 in the way that Solana or Monad or one of these other chains is doing?
I actually think the topology is not that relevant.
Okay.
I mean, I think it depends on what it's for, right? Like, is Ethereum trying to be Is it trying to be a world computer still? Maybe. Is it trying to be, ETH is money? Honestly, if Ethereum is just trying to be money, then these decisions are like basically irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like just go do some other, do politics.
Yeah.
Give Vitalik the ability to issue tokens and let him go negotiate with the governments of Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
I think people who say like ETH is money or something do not realize what that means. Yeah. Like if you want to compete with nation state money, okay, I support, I think that would be an interesting experiment to try in the world, but you're no longer stop pretending to be a technical platform. Yeah. This is a different thing. And on the other side, if Ethereum wants to be a world computer, then fundamentally what we're talking about here is a topology of where transactions get ordered, right? Like a transaction's first ordered, on L2s, or even before that in some other sequencer, then eventually ordered on the L1. The topology is talking about ordering because ordering has to happen, sequentially and kind of hierarchically. You can't have a piece of state where the ordering is decided in multiple places because then your system would be inconsistent. On the other hand, you can verify proofs everywhere. So as soon as you've made proofs of correct execution or whatever it is, especially, and there's been just amazing progress in applied zero knowledge proofs, saying proofs in the Ethereum ecosystem, and you can prove the EVM very quickly now. You can verify the proofs everywhere, right? So we're talking about an ordering topology, and where it makes sense to order things really depends on the actual state. Like, are we modifying the same chat group? Are we trading the same asset? Are we trading with each other? If it's like a database load balancing problem, in my view, at least. And if you look at database load, there's a scheduling problem. You take the intents and you see what state touches each other and you schedule it. So I don't even think you need to fix the topology. I think you just need standard, it could vary based on the load. You just need standardized state architecture so you can move everything around.
Hey, Will here with Blockspace Media. Did you know that we have individual feeds for all our shows? If you're watching the Mining Pod, Bitcoin Season 2, or the Gwart Show, be sure to check out the individual feeds. You can find them on your podcast player of choice, whether that be Spotify, Apple, YouTube, etc. Just type in Blockspace Media and you'll find all our shows pop up, or just type in the individual show name like the Mining Pod or Bitcoin Season 2. Be sure to hit that subscribe and give us a 5-star rating so we can continue to bring you the best content in Bitcoin.
I want to ask specifically about interop because I think that is one of your kind of areas of expertise. What do you think of the state of interop with, we'll use Ethereum as the L2s, what do you think of the state of this? Bridging, and is it where it needs to be? Should the EF have created a enshrined bridge or something like that? Just these different ideas about how you hear people talk about interop's all screwed up. Well, okay, we got an expert on. Let's hear your thoughts.
Well, I'll try not to disappoint. I think the state of interop is pathetic.
Okay.
It does depend. What do you want? What function are you optimizing for? If you're optimizing for the Ethereum ecosystem to be diverse and interesting, and you don't care about providing a unified product experience, then it's probably fine. There's diverse and interesting stuff going on, and different people will do their different things and their different interop protocols. And, if you try to use the whole system, it feels like a mess, but maybe you don't care, right? But if you care about unified product experience, then interop is the one. If you want, one way to think about it is you want to present the user something that's simple and standard and works predictably, right? And if you want a backend that's actually diverse and has L2s in different places and different people running them and, other kinds of diversity, then the problem of making that diverse backend look like and behave like this kind of simple standardized thing is literally the problem of interop, right? Yeah. How do you make these complex things interoperate? What do you need to standardize? That's the problem. So from that perspective, I think it is not being taken sufficiently seriously. Interop is a very hard problem. It's not it's not the easy problem.
Yeah.
Proving things even at this point is the easy problem. Making another state machine, launching another token, those are easy problems. Interop is hard. Also, I think it's you really have to try to answer the question of what do you want to interoperate? Like right now, people think of interop in terms of message passing, and so does IBC, or did IBC for Cosmos. I think that's not what people actually want now. They want interop at a higher level. They want like application interop. So they want to be able to move state around, with logic, not just sort of, so the developers don't have to manually code all this message passing or whatever. You just have this kind of virtual state space that abstracts over all of these various different backends, and you can treat it like it's a single sharded database in some sense. When you program a database, I don't know, you program sharded. What's a good sharded database? Been a long time since I used non-blockchain databases. I think PostgreSQL supports sharded.
Okay.
When you program sharded PostgreSQL, you don't write like create transaction, select from shard 1, select from shard 2, blah, 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 send message. No, that would be crazy. You write a high-level specification of, what you want the system to do, and then some scheduling figures out how to go execute it. And I think like people are not even thinking about interop on that higher level of abstraction yet. At least I haven't heard it from within the Ethereum ecosystem. They're thinking about, we need like a standardized cross L2 messaging protocol.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
And I mean, fine, but I don't think that will solve the problem.
Okay, interesting. One problem, if you will, I don't know, problem or more just evolution that I've seen is if you, like yourself, we were in crypto fairly early, right? And especially, I would say specifically for smart contracts, you were like utility protocols. If you were there at the beginning, and so you're like a great person to ask this question. You responded to my long rambling Twitter post, but the essence of it was that, I think there was in many ways this kind of, when we touched on this world computer, but this vision of the protocolization of everything and public goods, and that a lot of these things would be, minimally or not at all extractive as a result of them being, functionally peer-to-peer, and that a lot of this open source software was like the direction we were headed. And I think we've now seen a much more maybe pragmatic, less idealistic, and capitalism driven, trajectory for crypto. And for someone like you who's been there since the beginning, you were kind of like, I did get kind of pulled in. I don't want to say nerd sniped, but like, pulled in to some of these ideas. And now I'm also too realizing this. So I kind of wanted to hear your opinion, public goods and funding free open source software. Like what have you seen as this kind of transition? Like, what are your thoughts now?
For sure. Well, no, I mean, I felt, named and shamed, not exactly, but by that Twitter post, definitely I was in that camp. I mean, I think reading with the benefit of hindsight,
right.
Part of what happened was that a lot of, genuine idealism and open source software and some cool stuff coincided with a bunch of market speculation. And, the market speculation is also, it's related to of course, people speculate based on their ideas about what things might be valuable in the future, what things other people might consider valuable. So the kind of ideas around open source and public goods being valuable, I think, contributed to, in some sense, market speculation in open source and public goods. But, I think a few things then happened. One, there was not a lot of discipline or market discipline for many of these large open source public goods projects. I certainly include Cosmos in this category, even Anoma to some extent. And they mostly didn't do a great job at like delivering products, in the absence of discipline. I think some useful software got delivered, like some good research, some research progress, lots of applied cryptography research progress that got funded, but not a lot of great products. And all their people funded their lavish boat parties and their organizational drama fests and even just a bunch of stuff that's like not even necessarily bad. It just like wasn't forced to find product market fit and therefore didn't really try hard. And you have a lot of like ditzy projects and sort of, these blockchains that just limp on for years. They don't quite die, and there's like enough liquidity that people have forgotten about that they can keep doing stuff. But lots of that. And of course, a lot of other people realized that launching tokens was a business that could be very profitable and was easy to execute in a year or two and exit. And I mean, a lot of pretty awful stuff, at least from my perspective, came into the space, and I think in the eyes of the public, it's hard to distinguish between these things.
Yeah.
What are the real public goods projects? What are the people who are just branding as that thing, but really they're running an exit scam?
Yeah.
Who is actually using all this, all these resources to ship stuff that's going to be useful in the future? That's very hard for sort of random market participant to judge.
I was talking to somebody the other day about this, like what this is my perspective, and I'm not saying it's correct, but this is kind of the evolution that I saw, which was you did have, and probably would put you in this category. You had like some original, very idealistic people who had a vision for, the world computer, open source, internet, to tear down the incumbents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I was explaining this sort of trajectory I saw is because, I don't know, despite all my cynicism, despite my screeching at times, it's hard to sort of cast blame on any individual group, because I think the way I see it is that a lot of these incentives kind of in a bizarre way aligned. So you have these like idealist protocol developers who want to ship open source software and want to build a new internet. Well, you have VCs who say, oh, like, we can get behind that, right? You hack a token onto these things and we can get behind that.
Right.
That us also believing in that vision is mutually beneficial. And then the last kind of cohort of retail and traders, well, they want to see their bags go up. So they're incentivized to sort of push this notion. And along the way, obviously, you lose more and more of these idealists. And you start to question, like, how much of this is open source public goods? How much of this is business, capitalism, businesses, which is fine, to be clear, but distinguishing that from, so I do wonder, like, do you have, I'm not asking you to name names or anything, but like, do you see any specific periods of time or narratives that came along that sort of screwed this up, and made this maybe not worse, but just very different than what your, 2014 vision of the open internet was?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer to that question. I mean, I think you can identify discrete points in time where like the funding landscape shifted, in the Bitcoin, the Ethereum ICO was a crazy thing. Crazy people invested in the Ethereum ICO, not they knew what they were, in some sense. It would they kind of knew what they were buying. Like it wasn't, that's why I also don't want to hold. I mean, I think that by all accounts and measures, Ethereum is a stunning success. And what we're debating now is like what to do in the future, not whether it succeeded or failed. Even if it, stays where it is for the rest of time, it will have succeeded as being an amazing historical event. But, for example, in still the 2020, 2019 through 2021, 22 era, it was like the era of Ethereum killers, right? Or a lot of people were raising money to build ETH2, sort of will ship ETH2, but faster. That was kind of the near pitch. Or we'll the Solana is a more centralized, more product focused, move more quickly. There was Avalanche, there was Hashgraph, lots of this stuff, Polkadot. I don't know the details of these projects or exactly what they did, but at least they're you couldn't raise $100 million with no tech innovation, right? It was related to the technology. And I mean, by and large, these projects were they were serious. They built some new distributed system configuration. I mean, for distributed systems was popular then. Then there have been some eras more recently when ZK Tech got some investment a few years ago. That's still correlated with the technology. I mean, I think in the last 2 years, especially, there have been lots of projects launching that just aren't really doing any technological development work, right? They're just building sort of an application ecosystem and a community if you're being generous, or they're buying a lot of market maker deals if you're being less generous, and often both. I would put movement in this category, for example, quite solidly. And I mean, I'm not really here to say what's good and what's bad, but this is a big shift, right? And at this point, it's a very different industry. It's more of a pure attention competition. And in a pure attention competition, building tech just doesn't offer any comparative advantage anymore. Like, why would you spend money on this? You're going to lose. So
I think,
that's
one last
changed.
point that has been a running, point that people make for, I've heard this since I got into crypto, which I think is true, but I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts. Again, I'm not saying it's necessarily a problem, but one thing we definitely have seen is that if you have some novel idea, right? And we can debate how novel it is, but if you have some unlock that you think is a clear advantage over an incumbent, right? So take somebody on Ethereum and saying, look, I mean, maybe Avalanche is an example of this. Again, not debating whether or not this is true, but this is just an example I'm giving. Avalanche said we can do this differently from Ethereum, and the incentive oftentimes is to build your own thing almost always, right? Like if you're a developer who's relatively intelligent and you do have a vision, right? I'm not even necessarily saying this from the financial reasons, right? There are very oftentimes financial reasons, right? Launching a competing L1 is, you're probably going to be valued much higher, probably make a lot more money doing this. But just even from a technical level, it seems that if you have even a marginal unlock, the benefit to just doing it yourself as opposed to trying to weed through Ethereum politics or even make it, an Ethereum L2, or it's oftentimes, it's almost always the incentive is to create your own thing. And I'm curious, like where it seems maybe we're getting to kind of a higher bound on what you were saying. Like there's maybe the innovation just isn't there really to justify this any longer in these absurd valuations. But I've always, saw this, it's hard to keep people in an ecosystem, even if they have a small kind of unlock.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what you kind of see is that like the sort of funding, the economic flows have been very disconnected from value provided to users. I think that's the like fundamental tension, right? And then without, maybe if you had a more functional media ecosystem and the signal quality was better, of at least like who is a scammer, who is not a scammer, who is building things that will be valuable in the future, even if they aren't now, maybe this could last longer. But crypto exists in the crypto has failed to build an alternative media ecosystem of note, completely failed. Mostly exists in the broader media ecosystem, and the broader media ecosystem is, very financialized and decoherent, and trying to have decentralized network governance like does not mesh well with this. It just you get destroyed by the decoherence effects of Twitter or whatever it is, and everything. Half of what you're seeing is paid for, if not more, like signal quality structures, right? But I think that, in some sense, like people just won't buy this anymore. They won't buy the good stuff or the bad stuff because they can't tell the difference. And that's, it's, I mean, I think it will probably force more, it might force more acquisitions or other kind of less do your own thing. There can be lots of positive effects to it. I also, definitely a possible future at this point is that crypto sort of, the tech gets kind of, it's there, like some of it gets adopted by the banks. I'm very interested in alternative sort of monetary system equilibria, but I also feel like crypto as it stands today as a social movement is just unlikely. Like, I feel like that's not what most people are here for anymore. And it's unlikely to be, that's unlikely to result from things going the way that they are. And if you want an alternative money, like the thing about like something like revenue is just, it's not an impossible to fake signal. Like, it's easy to say, oh, look, they have revenue. It must be real. And if you look at past, recent Silicon Valley history, or just the fact like anyone can send a transaction on a blockchain and pay fees, and whether they're, it could be someone who works for the company, right? Like it's not that hard to fake the signal, but it is a better signal than just pure marketing,
really
right?
active
At least
or
it's
something like that. Like we're converging a little bit more on what could be reasonably interpreted as, okay, maybe this is useful as a function of fees paid, right? Like, so yeah, I would agree.
Right. So I expect that to improve, to provide some more signal. Maybe that will improve things, but it kind of also at the same time, that is the metric that guides financing for Silicon Valley companies, let's say. And I also, I don't know. I think it's a little bit sad. I wonder if there are ways to somehow synthesize these things and leave some more space open for alternative economic equilibria of project funding and continuance that just might allow for the production of different things, right? Like if crypto is totally governed by Silicon Valley metrics, then we're all competing with OpenAI to build the one everything out to rule them all and take an intermediary cut. And it's just like, well, man, is this really what you want to be doing with your life? I don't know. So.
Well, that was quite a poignant discussion to end on. So where can people find you? On Twitter? Is that the best place?
Yeah, on Twitter, sadly, deal with the devil and all that, but still there. And I also I read and respond to emails.
Okay.
Email, great communication technology.
One of the OGs. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It's fantastic.
Hey everyone, Charlie here. We're running a quick survey. We want to better understand who our listeners are. Do me a huge favor and fill out that survey. It takes under a minute, and the link is in the show description. This helps us make better content for you. Thanks a ton for listening. Link in the show notes.